Hey everyone, real quick, if you're interested in booking private lessons with me, you can contact me through my website at breenmusiclessons.com. Link in the description and the pinned comment. All right, so here's the saxophone solo on guitar from the BilMuri song 2016, Cavaliers. It's a pretty interesting solo because you get an insight into certain musical inflections that you don't ordinarily think of using on the guitar, but we can borrow those ideas and still use them on the guitar. A lot of grace notes, a lot of enclosures, which we'll get into what that means, but decorating a lot around otherwise kind of a typical G major kind of pentatonic feel. But like I said, with those extra ornamentations and grace notes, it sounds really interesting. So I'm starting on the 8th fret of the B string, and then I quickly hop over to the 8th fret on the high E string, and that sets up a grace note to the 10th fret on the high E string. Now a grace note is basically something that has almost no rhythmic value in the sound. So that 8th note you barely even hear. The target is ultimately the 10th fret on the high E string. Followed by another grace note slide from the 10th fret to the 12th fret on the high E string. So far, there's a little staccato ending. You don't really want to hear the sustain of that note on the 12th fret on the high E string for too long. Cuts it out a little bit, and then you do a grace note slide in the opposite direction, going from higher pitch to lower pitch, from the 12th fret to the 10th fret on the B string. Sliding to the 8th fret on the B string. Then you move over to the 8th fret on the B string. And now slowly sliding from the 10th fret to the 12th fret. Both of these notes have rhythmic value. (10 to 12), back to 10, and then finally pulling off to the 8th fret. You don't really have to pick much of this, especially if you have a distorted tone. The sustain should keep you going until the end of the phrase. Ending on that 8th fret. And obviously, as you hear it, there's a little bit of vibrato happening on all the notes that they're hanging on. So far, this is what it sounds like. So I did a pull off to the 8th fret, but then I picked the 8th fret again, just to give it a little more of an accent and an emphasis. Next up is kind of a little transition line. We hear that actually throughout the song in the rhythm section. It actually happens right before the solo starts as well on the rhythm guitars. Picking 10th fret on the B string, hammering to 12, still on the B string, hammering to 13. Back to 12, 10, 8. Next part, another grace note on the 8th fret to 10th fret, high E string. Back to the 8th fret on the high E string. Now the next phrase is very, in my opinion, very specific to the saxophone. We have a grace note slide, but to a note that's not in the scale. So by itself, that note would sound very off. Here, right there, the 11th fret on the B string, that note clearly does not sound like it works in the key that we're in. But because it's a grace note slide, you only hear just a little sliver of that note. Creates a little bit of tension, but it kind of creates some nice, ultimately it gives you nice contrast going to the 12th fret, which obviously is a note that works in the scale. Another interesting line here. So after the 12, pull off to the 11th fret, then pull off to the 10th fret, and then finally slide back to the 8th fret. Touching on that 11th fret again, which doesn't really belong in the scale, but it creates nice tension. So even though that note is tense, it does kind of serve a purpose a little bit. It's actually the major blues note. It's a minor third. If we're in the key of G major, that note would be the minor third, which obviously, since we are in the key of G major, doesn't really fit, but it gives you a little bit of that bluesy sound. I don't think that's really the aesthetic that we're hearing in the solo, but when you slow it down, it does become a little more obvious that it is a major blues note. So far this is what we have in the solo. Next up, we have another grace note slide from 10th fret to 12th fret, high E string. Followed by a little quick cluster of notes, hammering on to the 13th fret, pulling off back to the 12th fret, pulling back off to the 10th fret. So, right back onto the 12th fret as a hammer on. And then you can pick it one last time from the 12th fret to set up the grace note slide to the 15th fret. So this 13th fret is another example of a note that doesn't really work in the scale, but if we're kind of keeping with that bluesy theme, which like I said, I'm not sure if that's what they're thinking of when they're doing this kind of stuff, but that would be a flat 7. So if ordinarily we're just thinking about a regular major scale, that interval should be a major 7th, but the 13th fret is actually the minor 7th. So it kind of reinforces this bluesy sound. You can almost kind of think that there is like some kind of dominant 7th thing happening a little bit there, or a mixolydian sound. But again, like I said, you only really notice this stuff when it's played very slowly. When this stuff is happening very quick, like you hear on the recording, it's more of an afterthought, but it's still interesting to hear when you play it slow. So here's the whole solo.